Hi, I'm here with Erin Bishop, Oahu Invasive Species Committee. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
I'm good. You were just about to tell me what the difference between an invasive and a non-native species is.
Yeah, when we talk about invasive species in our environment, especially here in Hawaii, because we have so many unique endemic native species that oftentimes invasive species will get conflated with non-native species, and we just kind of think of them all as bad. But there actually is a federal definition for an invasive species. And it's any non-native plant or animal or pathogen that negatively impacts three things: our environment, our health, and our economy. Hawaii has adopted another category, and that is our quality of life. And so we
Okay.
have a unique opportunity to live in a lot of our outdoor environments in Hawaii year round. So quality of life, but also because environment's so closely attached to cultural importance here in Hawaii, that quality of life should be considered. Yeah.
So
Um,
so
mhm.
so give us the New York Post dangerous clickbaity headline. Why are fire ants bad? What should we be worried
uh, yeah, so they are on the list of the world's worst 100 invasive species. So that's up there with invasive mammals, diseases, plants. The reason it's on that list is because it hits all four of those categories. So it harms our health because they have a very painful sting. Their invasiveness allows them to reach just maximum densities. So if your yard is infested and you're not controlling it, it's impossible to be in your yard and not get stung every day. So that's an issue. Because they live in the trees and on the ground, stings are not restricted to your feet. So here in Hawaii, we have a tropical fire ant that stings us on our feet, or if you sit on the ground. But little fire ants will literally rain down from the trees. They blow out of the trees, they get stuck in your hair and your clothes. And that's an issue, and it's a big issue for little kids too. So
Yeah.
especially if you have little kids that have sensitive skin or they're reactionary to stings and bites, that's an issue.
This
So it's harmful for our health. And then it also stings pets in their eyes. So animals will get them on their fur. The ants are attracted to soft body parts, so they go for the eyes. When animals get stung in their eyes, it causes keratopathy, which is a permanent blindness. It's very painful. So they're also, so that's health. Environment wise, they're predatory ants, so they will swarm birds on the nest. They eat baby birds, they eat insects. So that's an issue for our native birds, the large majority of which are critically endangered. They want to live in the forest where our native species are left. So you don't see native birds flying around uh, Kapolei or in Manoa. You're going to find them up in the summits, and that's where the birds want to live. So that's an issue for our environment, for our economy, because you can't really utilize your space unless you control these ants. The cost comes down to either the taxpayer, so if the government is going to have a program and control this, or you yourself. And then if you can't nip this in the bud, if it's allowed to widely establish and spread, then it just becomes everybody's problem, and you yourself are going to have to control that. And that's also an issue for agriculture. So if you have coffee orchards or lychee, no one's going to want to come pick your fruit unless you're controlling ants because they're going to get stung from head to toe every day. And if you have an organic farm, it's even harder because as of right now, they're still looking into it, but there's really no effective organic approved treatment to get rid of these ants. And you're not going to be able to export. So a lot of other places don't want this ant. If you have them on your products, they're going to get sent right back. You're not going to be able to export your
no.
agricultural products. And then just quality of life. I mean, if you like to go hiking, if you want to hang out under a tree at the beach and get some shade, if you get stung and if you get lit up every time you go, you're not going to do it. If you make lay, you can't pick lay in places that are infested with ants. You're just not going to go there. So it's a really impactful invasive species on all fronts.
This is great. Fear sells. So I'm really hoping that this this catches on with people. Fire raining from the skies,
Yeah.
biting your eyes and your children and your dogs. And that sounds awful. For people who are listening who maybe don't know who you are and what you do, could you give us a little bit of background and why do you know so much about fire ants?
So I'm the outreach coordinator for the Oahu Invasive Species Committee. We are a project of the University of Hawaii, and we work locally just in the county, city and county of Honolulu. Each island in Hawaii has their own invasive species committee. So there is a BISC for Big Island, MISC, Maui, MOMISC, Molokai, and a KISC for Kauai, or OISC. So we got a lot of ISCs. The reason we exist is we are trying to fulfill and do a rapid response to pests that have shown up. We have a chance to control or eradicate, contain them. And the idea is that we can act in a way that other agencies don't maybe have the capacity to do. And so Department of Agriculture, they're responsible for inspections and trying to keep these agricultural pests out. Division of Forestry and Wildlife is concerned with protecting habitat for native species. Department of Health is concerned about species that bring in pathogens like dengue fever and Zika virus. But those are very large state mandated organizations. And we're very much we're soft funded. So every year we fight for the grants that we get and we tell them what we're going to work on. So we work for the species of highest concern. And with our limited small capacity, we say this is what we think that we can do if you give us the money. If we have 12 field crew, we can go out and work on these things. And we also work very closely with the community in which we operate. So we work a lot with private landowners. We consider them partners in this because invasive species do not respect tax map key boundaries. They're going to move from property to property. And so we have the opportunity to talk to people and say, can you please allow us onto your property? We're targeting this species. And so it creates that partnership with the public as well.
Wow. Okay. So where where are we in this? Are we, I hate to say winning or losing, but is this something that's not at all under control? Is it something that's burning out of control? Is it something sort of in the middle?
Um, it's something sort of in the middle. So they were
Specific,
first
I guess
detected
specifically on Oahu, I guess, and
on
then
Oahu. Yeah, so it was first detected on Oahu in December of 2013. And they caught little fire ants on coming over on some hapu'u logs. So they're like those fern logs, they're used a lot with growing. They were able to track down those hapu'u logs. They were shipped over from the Big Island. Um, but that sort of generated a response like, where else are they?
Mhm.
And in that time, we have grown from that initial detection, and it's really kind of ramped up over the past, I'd say, 4 years to where now we have 72 detections on Oahu. Um, that is concerning, and that there's so many and we're struggling to respond to them. The capacity isn't there yet.
Mhm.
That's the biggest concern that we have right now. If we can't boost our capacity, um, we could lose the fight. So that's kind of where we are.
So it could get out of control.
It could, yeah, we're at a pretty critical point right now.
Mhm.
And when I say that it's sort of, we've seen this rise in detections over the past 4 to 5 years, it's not necessarily that the ants are just spreading out of control. With outreach, especially with new species, unless people are getting impacted and they see it in their day-to-day life, it kind of just sits in the back of their mind. Maybe they'll remember it. But now that we've been doing outreach about this for 10 years and people are starting to check to see if they do have little fire ant, it's kind of made it into the news cycles. I think people are now more aware. So they're looking for it, which is good. That's what we've always wanted. And the reason we want people to look for it and find it is because if we can find it within those first few years of it being there on their property, we're going to catch it before it spreads across the neighborhood. So it's easier to contain and stamp out those little fires as they pop up. And that's where we're at. So that's kind of where, when we move forward and we talk about funding for this, we want to give a better picture of this is what we need to continue to stamp out these fires. And it's going to be years that we're going to have to do this
Mm,
unless we just let it go. And then it's up to you to control it in your yard and your neighbor and the school and the hospital and everybody to be controlling LFA on their property. And a
mm.
lot of people aren't going to be able to do it. They're not going to be able to afford it. They might not see it as a priority. Maybe they don't live there all year round.
Wow.
So yeah, we kind of have this opportunity now to get a handle on it. And even though it's something that we'll probably have to continue to work on, as they are really established on Big Island. It's just kind of a source for them to be able to be moved around.
Mm,
Um, it doesn't mean that we should let it go. There's a lot of new ideas and technologies that are coming out. So if we can kind of keep it at bay and do better on several different fronts, if we can get Department of Agriculture money to have more inspectors, if we can provide support for nurseries to be doing regular treatments, if we can have more inspectors,
mhm.
if we can maybe start using detector dogs to do quick surveys at ports, make it easier to find these ants. And then treatment, we're trying, there's a key project is got some funding and they're doing some trial runs to see if they can do treatment applications with drones. So sort of larger areas that are near a house, maybe a hillside, that maybe if we could treat it with a drone, it would save us a lot of time and ground crew. You don't have to have ground crew to do it. You could maybe do a treatment in about a third of the time. So a lot of options are coming down, a lot of new technologies. And so that's why we think we should continue to try and keep this at bay.
Yeah, it does make sense to get things taken care of before they become a problem. Part two, I guess, to that question would be how. I want to ask you another question too. I don't want to forget it, so I'm just going to say it with this. But how bad is it in the other islands, and what does do the kinds of treatments look like? And maybe we can answer the outer islands first, and then we'll jump into talking about treatment and we'll riff on that if you want.
Yeah. So little fire ants first showed up on Big Island in 1999. That's when they first detected it. And with that, there wasn't a lot of research about this species of ants. There's 12,000 species of ants worldwide. Not all of them are really invasive. Some are just sort of pests. There wasn't a whole lot of research about this. I think Australia was some of like the most impacted places by little fire ant at that time. So, Department of Agriculture was trying to figure out a way to get research, so they helped fund the Hawaii Ant Lab. And the Hawaii Ant Lab was able to do a lot of research, literature reviews, and trials to figure out an eradication program. So they were able to figure out the best treatment for little fire ant given their habitat, where they like to live. They live up high up in the trees. You can't throw granular bait 80 feet high in a coconut tree. So they did a lot of research, but by the time they were able to figure out how to best treat it, little fire ants had spread beyond somewhat of an eradication program and then beyond control on the Big Island. So every district on Big Island has little fire ants.
Mm,
They do work with communities to try and have a community action program. So BISC will say, okay, if you and 20 of your neighbors get together and meet with us, we'll teach you how to treat your properties. Um, when they have funding, they'll help subsidize the pesticides to do the treatment, just so that you and your neighborhood kind of get some reprieve from these ants. But since that time, they have had detections on all other islands except for Molokai. Molokai's never had a detection of little fire ant to date. Lanai had one. They were able to get rid of that population and they haven't had one since. Maui has a couple of active infestations, and so does Kauai. So we know that they're easily kinds of products, equipment, vehicles, gravel, mulch, and plants, of
mm,
course. So Oahu is the leader, unfortunately, in detections. However, we do have the highest population. It is the hub for everything coming in and out of the state. And we do a lot of importing here too. Yeah, so that's kind of where it is in the state. So we're all managing it on some kind of level. It's just the amount of resources that people can put towards it vary from state to state.
Right. So I guess that kind of segues us into talking about treatment.
Mhm.
There's this, I'm getting like 100 questions in my head all at the same time, but as far as treatment goes, what are kind of the prevailing treatments, like the commonly used treatments? What are some of like the safety concerns that there might be? Like I'm sure there's probably like just chemotherapy bomb level toxicity, just scorched earth treatments. I'm sure there's sort of, you know, I don't know, soapy water and rosemary oil or something, some very like kind of holistic thing that may be effective or may not be effective. And there's a lot of stuff in between, I'm sure, in terms
Yeah.
of toxic or not toxic or effective or not effective. And what's commonly being used, what's more effective, and then yeah, we'll start there, I guess.
Yeah, so with with treatment, especially with colony insects like ants, you if you want to get rid of it, you have to kill the queens. With ants, when you look at you see a trail of ants, just know that that is the tip of the iceberg. The majority of ants live within the nest, and all of those worker ants support the queen. So when you talk about sort of a bomb treatment, you could probably fog your house and get rid of little fire ants if they're in your house, and then come back in 3 months and they're going to reinfest because somewhere there's a queen and she didn't die.
Right.
So the treatment's very specifically designed to target the queens so that they'll stop laying the eggs. And the treatment, like you said, there is sort of like a scorched earth, but it's a restricted use pesticide that you have to have a special applicator's license to apply. And that's usually done in cases like, let's say you have a container coming from Big Island of a bunch of high value landscaping products and little fire ants detected. You can go to Department of Agriculture, get a restricted use pesticide operator, go in there, treat that entire container and be sure that you've killed everything. And then they'd
Mhm.
be ready to use. But that's restricted use pesticide. It's not something that you would apply on a landscape scale, right? It's
Right.
small, it's targeted, and you have to have a special operator's license.
Right. So it's clunky, it's expensive, it's
Yeah.
toxic, and it's also like a super, super branch treatment. It's like very kind of far removed from the initial source of the nest or the source of the problem. It's
Yeah, and
like,
so when you do the treatments that we're doing, it's a two-pronged approach. So because the ants will nest on the ground and in shrubbery, we use a toxicant granular and put that on the ground. It is non-restricted. These are things that you could purchase off of Amazon. You can get them at City Mill, you can get them at Home Depot. And then that is placed on the ground. When you talk about the ants in the tree, there is a special gel that Hal has developed a recipe for. And basically, it's not toxic, it's an insect growth regulator. And so you mix this insect growth regulator with water and xanthan gum and vegetable oil and peanut butter, because that's what attracts the ants. But those worker ants will then feed on it, take it back to the nest, feed the other ants in the nest, and then eventually those ants will then feed the queen. And it makes it so that her eggs don't hatch. And
mm,
that gel bait is what you have to spray into the trees. It's sort of like a pancake batter consistency, and you put just a little bit like dollops on the trunk. And then
uh-huh.
the ants, they feed that because you can't get granular baits. And ants that are very high up, let's say you have a really big monkey pod tree or an albizia tree, they can stay up there for years before they ever come down to the ground to forage, as long as they have some food source up there. So you have to be able to get the gel bait
Wow.
up into the trees.
And those are big, gigantic trees too.
Yeah, they are. So all of those things, that toxicant bait, the active ingredient is hydromethanol. And then you have the insect growth regulator that's in the gel. Those are specifically targeted for insects. So bees aren't going to feed on it because they're not attracted to xanthan gum and peanut butter. So you don't have to worry about that. Ants will feed on it, but Hawaii has no native ants. We have no native
Uh-huh.
ants. They're all invasive on some level. Some are just pests. Some
Yeah.
might just bother you and cause you to have to, the black ants that harvest crop pests, the aphids and mealybugs. But then you have the really invasive ants like little fire ants. So they target ants specifically, and they are safe for people and pets and birds. One of the questions we get a lot is when you sprinkle the granular bait, if you have chickens around, the chickens think you're putting out food and they eat the bait. It does nothing for the chickens. It won't harm them. The issue is that you're making the bait unavailable for anything else that's there because the chickens are eating it. Yeah. So yeah, it's very safe. It's safe for people, pets, and kids. And the good thing about it is that when we do a treatment, we'll ask everybody just to go inside because we don't want to get oily gel on you or on your dog. But you can go back into the yard immediately when you're
Yeah.
done. There's like no re-entry, wait time, everything's safe to use. And it's effective. So there've been eradications using this method. Even on Maui, they had a treatment of 150 acres. They applied this gel bait by helicopter because the area was so impassable to get to
Wow.
on foot. And they have had extremely wonderful results. I think they found like 3 vials with LFA across 150 acres after doing these treatments. So it's
Wow.
effective, it's long term. You have to do it every 6 weeks, and you have to do 8 treatments. So it's a year. And then as you do the treatment halfway through, we go in and do a survey to see how the treatment's working. And then when we're done, we do another survey to make sure there's no LFA. And then we will monitor it for another 3 years, just in case we missed a queen and she's rebounding the population. We'll know about it and we can go in and target. So it's not just controlling ants, this is an eradication. We're trying to get rid of the queens. A lot of the other treatments that people do, they just have someone come and spray their yard every 3 months. It's not doing anything for the queens. You're just keeping them down out of your property. We're trying to get rid of an entire population, that entire colony of ants.
Now, we know dogs love peanut butter. Are
Mhm.
they safe with the peanut butter pudding method?
They are, and usually they can't reach it anyway because they're putting it way high up in the
Fair
trees.
enough.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So the hydromethalon you said was that's what get sprayed in the peanut butter, or is that on the ground?
That's on the ground.
That's
So
the granular.
that's the toxicant bait that works on the ants. And then Tango is the insect growth regulator that's used for the gel bait. And that's non-toxic. It's just prevents, it's like a birth control for the ants.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, geez, what should is the average listener the average person who's listening right now? Maybe they're thinking there's something there. I've seen little ants in my yard. How do I know? Maybe they want to do something but don't know where to start, or maybe they don't even know how to diagnose. Like, how does the average person diagnose and treat, or how does somebody go to report a large population of ants? Maybe they find at a park or something.
Yeah. So we have we have a method, and what we've been doing is we ask you to test your yard, and it sounds complicated and involved. It's not at all. It's the easiest test you'll ever do in your life, probably. And we can mail kits out to people. So first off, we have to figure out what kind of ants you have. In Hawaii, we have over 60 species. Some to the naked eye look like little fire ants. Little fire ants are very, very small. They're only as long as a penny is thick. So they're actually kind of hard to see. And they're about the
Mhm.
same color as a penny. They're sort of a rust colored. And so you will get a kit, or you can do this with whatever you have at your house. You take coffee stirrers, put a little bit of peanut butter on the end, lay it flat in your yard and shady and damp areas. You don't put it right out in the middle of the yard, put it under a tree or by a bush. Leave it there for 45 minutes to an hour. If you wait longer than an hour, the ants will eat the peanut butter and go away, and you'll never know what you have. So it's pretty quick. And then you pick it up, and when you pick it up, if there's any ants on the stick, just put it in a Ziploc bag and freeze it overnight. And then when you're ready, you take it out of the freezer and you can just mail it to us in the mail. You just put the Ziploc bag, your contact information. We get the ants and we look at them under a microscope. And if it's little fire ants, we contact you and basically we have to set up sort of a neighborhood survey. Very rarely is it just your house that has the ants. They might have come from somewhere else. We don't know. So we survey until we find no more ants, and then that's the treatment area. If it's some other kind of ant, we tell you, we're like, well, it's some common thing that's already here in Hawaii, and we can give you a recommendation. So the sugar baits at City Mill might work for this, or maybe you need a different bait from somewhere else if you're trying to control some common ant on your property. And
Cool.
then once we figure out the treatment area, we set up a treatment a cycle. So the first treatment, this is going to be on XYZ. We have to do those treatments all together. So the really important thing about this response is that everyone is cooperative and agrees to it. Because if there's 12 properties that have the ants and one of those properties says, no, I don't want the treatment. I don't want treatment on my property. We won't do it because we can treat 11 people and get rid of their ants. But if there's 20 queens on that one property, everyone's just going to get reinfested. So it
Mhm.
really is a cooperative effort. And we try to convey and address everyone's concerns about this. The nice thing about this treatment method is that it is safe. It's not necessarily quick because it's a year of treatment. However, when I come and treat a property, I can do it in 5 minutes. I might come every 6 weeks, but I'm there for 5 minutes. I'm in and out and you're done. So it's really a very low impact to anybody to have the treatments. And right now, because this is still something that we're trying to contain, we have funding for this. So it is of no cost to you as a person with LFA. This is something that is a response to a high threat pest. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Cool. So is there and I'll share this in the notes, either the show notes or something. Is there a website that people can go to report? Like, how should people get in touch?
Yeah, so if you want, go to stoptheant.org, and there is a little green tab at the top. It says request a collection kit, and we'll mail you everything you need except for the peanut butter to collect your ants. It's got a self-addressed stamped envelope. You can just send your ants back to us. For those people who do have an allergy to peanut butter, you can use mayonnaise instead, but the real mayonnaise, not olive oil mayonnaise or anything like that. It has to have the oils and the lipids and the fats in it. That's what the ants are attracted to.
So they want Hellman's. They don't want the fancy.
Yes.
They don't
And they
want
want,
artisanal.
yeah, yeah. And they want Skippy and Peter Pan and Jif. They don't want almond butter or anything like that. They want
Right.
the sugar and the fat.
Little fire
Yeah.
ants do not like Whole Foods
Yeah.
or down to earth. They like the
Yeah.
swag.
Yes,
Good.
exactly.
Um, so I imagine people are going to reach out after this, and if you have any questions that you want me to forward, you can reach out to us at info@oahuholisticmedicine.com, or can they reach out to you specifically at your website, or just call the organization, or go to stoptheant.org? Would that make the most sense?
They can do any of those things. So our website is oahuisc.org. So oahuisc.org. My email's on there. It's just oisc@hawaii.edu. So they can email me. But reach out. Stop the Ant is sort of a repository for little fire ant information statewide. There are tabs on there if they want to go to the Oahu tab. There's more very specific information about where we've found these detections. There's a map so you can get a general idea. The one thing I would highlight though is if you look at the map and you're like, wow, I don't have any LFA near me. That's just because no one's looked, maybe. So October is Stop the Ant Month. Ideally, we would want every single person on Oahu to do this test once a year. You should test your property once a year. And if you do that, that ensures if you do it for 3 years and you don't have any ants, and then on that fourth year, bam, you find out you have LFA. Generally speaking, that means it's an early detection, and maybe it came in on something that you brought in, or maybe it's from your neighbor's property. It's going to help us find these infestations early. So instead of treating 80 properties, maybe we can get you into treatment really quick because it's only 3. So early
Okay.
detection's the best. It's like with medicine, when you start to feel like you're not feeling very good, maybe you take some vitamin C or zinc. This test is like the vitamin C and zinc of trying to protect yourself from LFA.
Right. So instead of,
Yeah.
oh, I saw a couple ants 3 years ago and now I have an infestation. Like if you see something, it might be better to check now. And it's of no
Yeah.
cost. It's of no cost, right?
Totally
Because
free.
that's
Yeah.
amazing. Except
And
for
then,
the the Kewpie mayonnaise or the Jif peanut butter, the Peter Pan or
yeah,
whatever.
exactly. Yeah. And then the thing is, when you find it early, it's the best thing because you're kind of ensuring that you're not waiting around till your yard's completely overloaded and you're getting stung. So don't wait. That's sort of the tagline. Don't wait for them to find you, right? Find them first. Don't wait around
Yeah.
until you're getting stung or your kids or your grandkids are getting stung in the yard. So look for it early. And then also anytime you purchase or receive a plant, test it. Little fire ants are very small. They're easily hidden. People might not realize they're in a plant. So when you get a plant or plants, we recommend you put it somewhere off to the side, your carport, a driveway. Just set it off to the side, leave it for a few hours, and put a stick with some peanut butter in there and see what comes out.
Okay, so now if somebody gets a plant and they bring it home and they realize that there's little fire ants in it, are those ants able to like build a new queen and make a new nest, or is it sort of nothing to worry about, or should they treat that plant, or should they burn it? What
Yeah,
happens?
so usually if you had a plant, you brought it home, you could take it back to where you got it, but definitely let someone know because we would want to know where it came from so that we could get the place that it came from under treatment so
Yeah.
that it's not being spread further. Generally speaking, if it's a small plant, we would just bag it, freeze it to kill all the ants, and then throw it away.
Should they let
Um,
the nursery know?
Yeah, I would report it to us. Department of Ag works very closely with nurseries so they can make sure that they're getting the support they need to get treatments done. But reporting it is the best thing. One of the things is with this sort of coordinated effort and trying to manage this on an island scale, is that we kind of need to know where all the ants are. If we don't know where ants are, we can't do treatments. And if your plant has a queen, you absolutely can start more than one colony. These ants clone themselves.
What?
So, yeah, and so in their invaded range, little fire ants, they clone themselves. They don't reproduce sexually, so that when a colony up in a tree meets a colony on the ground, they don't fight for territory. They recognize each other as family and they start to work together. So what ends up happening is you have these, they're called super colonies. So you'll have nests with multiple queens. You'll have areas like your backyard could have hundreds of queens in it because they're all working together to support each other. It's not just one queen and some workers. It's this three-dimensional super colony.
Whoa, hold on a second. Hold on. A three-dimensional super colony of clones that rain down from the trees and bite you in
Yeah.
the eyes? This is horrifying. What
Yeah.
do you mean hold on, what do you mean they clone themselves and what do you mean super colony? Because this is crazy.
Yeah. So they don't reproduce sexually in invaded ranges. And I'm not sure, I haven't seen any definitive. I'm sure there's theories about why they do this. This helps them establish themselves wherever they are, regardless of what other ants are there. And so when they clone themselves, um, it's called parthenogenesis, and it's a very specific type. So sometimes snakes will do this, they can clone themselves. But this allows for them to work together so that instead of territorial ants vying for resources, they are all working together to support not just one queen, but multiple queens. And when I say three-dimensional, I'm talking about the the geographic layout of your property. So you're going to have ants in your palm tree and your shrubs and on the ground. So when we do the treatment, you can't just treat the ground. You
Hmm.
have to treat everything else because they'll continue to reinfest areas. And then these super colonies are because they have multiple queens, hundreds of queens, if allowed to get really dense populations and spread. So
Oh
this
my
is
God.
one of the reasons they're so good at being invasive. It's also another reason why ants have been around since the dinosaurs. I mean, they're highly evolved and very efficient at what they do.
So, okay, I might be in the weeds here and I might be hung up on the whole cloning thing, but how does an ant clone itself? Are the queens cloning them? They don't walk around with test tubes and lab coats. Like,
Right, right. So what'll happen, generally speaking, is that when a colony gets really dense, so you have a queen, she's got some workers, they're feeding her, and then it starts to get a little crowded. She will lay queen eggs, a special
kind of like a
egg that,
beehive.
yes, and then those queens will hatch. They'll literally put some ants on their back and walk a few feet away and start their own colony. And then when that gets really dense, they lay some queen eggs. Those queens will hatch. They walk a few feet away. It's called budding. So what you get when you talk three-dimensionally, it's kind of like a central queen, and then she starts to lay more queens. And they're very densely packed and they don't spread that far on their own. Um, so it slowly grows, but it becomes very dense. They sort of take over the area where they are. So in a highly infested area, generally you don't see other insects. You don't see other kinds of ants. You're really not going to
Wow,
see a lot of birds. On Big Island, they say, this is anecdotally, in areas that are highly infested with LFA, they see fewer coqui frogs because the ants are eating baby coqui frogs and the froglets, or the frogs are like, they're stinging ants. I'm out of here. I'm going to go hop over somewhere else where there's no ants. So they get really dense and they have these budding clonal colonies that are all working as one giant super colony.
that's horrifying.
Yeah.
And it also, so it's not just one nucleus. It kind of decentralizes itself.
Yeah. It's
That's
kind of like
awful.
weeds too. You know, when you think of plants that are really weedy, you can pull one, but if you leave a root there, it just starts growing up and then it sends tubers up. And next thing you know, you've got a patch of weeds and
So to
really
get
hard
a
to get rid of.
little, yeah. So to that, and to get a little like, I don't know if esoteric is the right word, but um, if you have something that's so opportunistic and is so almost virulent in terms of the way that it can propagate and be sort of create itself as a monoculture in a way, or monopolize its little corner that it exploits, its little niche, right? Um, isn't that like winning the evolutionary game? Like, is it, isn't that kind of the point? And
Um,
so why
mhm.
should we? Isn't that the point? And like, why should we care? Why
Yeah,
should we do
so
anything?
it's a wonderful question and it gets asked a lot. I mean, it makes you think, right? Well, what they're so good at, who are we to stop them? Right. So, what's important to remember with invasive species, especially here in Hawaii, before the early Polynesian voyagers, before they arrived here, this place was teeming with life. There were plants, there were birds, there were insects and spiders and even pathogens, fungus and bacteria. People did not bring that here. It was an evolutionary process that happened to make Hawaii so unique. It is when people came and started bringing new things to introduce to an area, they're upsetting the balance of things. And so, who are we to stop something? Is kind of the same way as like, who are we to bring
Right.
anything?
I guess
So
I
it's sort
mean
of a
I mean
responsibility to
right.
maintain a balance.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so in Hawaii right now, we have native plants, non-native plants, and invasive species, right? Those are the three, or I guess in any ecosystem you would have that. That's the sort of
Yeah.
the tripartite relationship.
Right.
Um, what in your world, so I guess like in Hawaii and throughout the world, like what's sort of the stance or the narrative or the kind of the prevailing ideology in terms of addressing finding an appropriate balance, which is what I think we're talking about here. Like where you bring in a species that is not necessarily from here, it's not inherently bad or wrong, but it destabilizes the existing ecosystem and it causes a lot of problems. And it's also like itchy and it hurts. So So what's sort of like the prevailing thing? Like obviously we want to preserve the native flora and fauna and things that are um, that that preceded us, like sort of the history, the ethnobotany history. The We want to preserve biodiversity, right? Making sure that the ecosystem is stable and there's enough of everything to make sure that we don't have these monocultures that can hurt us basically through massive imbalance in our ecosystem. But like what's the right amount of native to non-native to invasive? Like what's the ideology there?
I think it comes back to understanding how unique ecosystems in Hawaii work. So when you try to consider, should you provide balance so that a native species can not just survive, but persist and thrive? And so if you're talking about something being inherently good, that's one perspective. And it's something to consider, because there's so much culturally tied to native species and native ecosystems here that when you talk about preserving the balance of an ecosystem, it also helps perpetuate a culture of the native Hawaiians. When you talk about environmental impacts, um, understanding that preserving a forest so that native birds can have a place to live, understanding what role those native birds play in pollination, insect control, keeping forests healthy so that maybe a tree like ohia can persist. And understanding that without an ohia forest, our reserves and our aquifers are going to be reduced because it has been proven that ohia capture water better. They capture cloud passage. They restore the aquifers, provide water that we need. We don't have lakes and rivers in Hawaii. Everything we get is pumped out of the mountains. And even when you talk about things like kohuli, so our native snails, LFA would be detrimental for them. So what is this teeny tiny snail? What does that do? Well, they clean the leaves off of ohia. They help provide better photosynthesis. There's so many things even that we don't even know about yet.
Yeah, the interconnectedness of all things.
Yeah, so and then another thing with invasive species is that it's often a compounding issue. So for instance, rapid ohia death could kill off our ohia trees. But if we don't manage, say, the invasive plant Miconia and keep that at bay, so when ohia trees die, if Miconia is allowed to persist, it will completely take over. Their
Okay,
seeds last for 20 years.
pause there because I want to
Yeah.
hear more about that exact thing. Can you zoom out 2 or 3 steps and talk to us like we're all morons? Because you're on a super technical point. Like what is Maconia and Ohia death? What is all that?
So ohia is our most common and dominant native forest tree. Rapid ohia death is a non-native fungal pathogen that kills ohia trees by choking off the vascular system of the tree. Miconia is an invasive plant that was introduced to Hawaii through the botanical trade. They didn't realize how invasive it was. It's from South America, and that happened in the 60s. And you can see Miconia readily on the windward side of Big Island. But Miconia is shade tolerant, so it can easily live and wants to live in our native forests. So if we have our dominant native forestry dying and it gets replaced with Miconia, which then has all kinds of trickle-down effects, such as reduction of water capture, aquifer recharge. It
Whoa.
promotes landslides, it promotes erosion. The seeds last for 20 years. So even if you do have a removal of Miconia, it will continue to pop up for 20 years. It's like a long-term management.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so that's compounding, right? So rapid ohia death is a concern, but and then maybe they'll get replaced by something like strawberry guava, which is incredibly invasive. It captures 30% less water than ohia does.
Yeah.
It grows rapidly. And so that's generally the nature of invasive species is that they reproduce and grow rapidly. They have a wide range of variety of habitat. They're not really habitat specific. They outcompete for resources. So it's what makes them so good at being invasive. Generally, you will get these compounding factors then. So they
So,
can play off of each other because they're so adaptable.
mhm. So I guess I've always, this is a little bit of a personal like question and a personal musing. Guess I'm interested in your opinion. I've always been uh, curious as to like when does a plant become natural? Like when does it become part of the landscape? When does it become native? So presumably all plants that have existed here on Hawaii, if you go back far enough, they were they weren't here. They evolved here, they traveled here, they grew here, and then at some point they were considered native and they were part of the culture of the people who were there. And according to the historians that I've talked about, there has been a change of there could have been many changes of the people who were here before, and then the most recent iteration being the contemporary Hawaiians or the ancient Hawaiians, depending on your temporal frame. How wide your time frame is of what you consider to be new or not. But when does a plant be sort of become accepted into like, oh well, this is just a plant that grows here now,
Yeah,
or like when's the statute of limitations run out on
yeah,
a plant?
right. The easiest explanation for what is a native plant is it's or species here in Hawaii, it's anything that arrived to Hawaii on its own volition without the help of human beings.
Mm,
So it's birds flew here, birds brought plants here, they ate, they came here, distributed the seeds. Our native spiders can throw their webs up into the air and catch a high atmospheric drift and drift thousands of miles. So native plants and animals that we consider to be native here in Hawaii were here before people ever got here.
mm,
This leads us to why we have so many endemic native species, meaning species that are only found in Hawaii, because they had 70 million years when they arrived. We're so far removed that we didn't have a ton of stuff coming. It wasn't like every day there's 40,000 new things coming. It's not like that. We're so far removed that when things arrived here, they were able to evolve and adapt very specifically to their location. So for instance, our native Hawaiian mint doesn't smell like mint. So there was no ungulates to eat it here, so it didn't need that defense. So it lost that defense.
mm.
That's why a lot of our endemic species are very vulnerable because they evolved in a place without a lot of pressure. When the Polynesians came, we hear about the canoe plants, right? So kalo or taro, coconuts. These are things that were not originally found in Hawaii, but they were important because you're traveling, you're going to need medicine, you're going to need food. Those are considered non-native species, but because you can plant a coconut tree in your yard and 10 years later it's not taking over your neighborhood, right? They don't have those invasive qualities, like reproducing very quickly, taking over, outcompeting for resources. They sort of mesh in and they're economically, culturally important. So just because it's non-native plant or animal doesn't make it bad. Then, with the arrival and colonization of the Hawaiian Islands, you get a massive influx of new things coming. And then some of those intentional, many of them not intentional, people bringing their plants from their home country because they miss them.
We're
Um,
talking post-colonial or
yeah,
post
starting
contact.
starting in about the 1700s, you start to see this new influx of things coming in. And then now with modern globalization, it's every day something's
Yeah.
coming, hopefully they catch it. That's great. That's what inspectors are for. But it's just this massive influx. We import over 90% of everything we use in Hawaii. That's a lot of opportunity for things to come from not just the mainland, but from other countries too.
Cool. So we have a couple minutes left, and I want you to have the opportunity to just like say whatever it is that you want to say here, and make sure that people know. Like if you have the mic, you have the loudspeakers, say whatever you want, or tell us something maybe that'll blow our minds about the work that you do. Whatever, it's kind of
Yeah.
essay question. What do you want us to know?
Um, I think that invasive species, whether you realize it or not, impact your life. So the next time you freak out because you see a cockroach, that's an invasive species. They're not native. We never used to have cockroaches. We never had mosquitoes. We didn't have scorpions. We didn't have centipedes. We invasive species really are now part of the landscape. And I would say that understanding that they do cause issues is probably the best place for anybody to start. Um, and then also I think it would be wonderful. And I'm not from Hawaii. I've been here for 14 years, but learning something about some native species will ultimately help you appreciate your place a bit better. So if you've never seen an ohia, go to a botanical garden and take a look and maybe look into it. They're pretty amazing. There's a lot of different species, there's many different varieties. And it is such an important tree to us here in Hawaii. So the more you understand your place, I think the better appreciation you're going to have for it. And then the more you understand about invasive species, it's not just an environmental issue. It's everything. It's your health, it's your economy, it's the health of your pets, your kids, and your quality of life. I mean, we love living here, right? It's great to be able to go outside all year round, but if it's raining, stinging ants, it's gonna change your perception a bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that makes you pay attention when stuff is biting you.
Yeah. Absolutely. And the
So
easiest thing people can do is if I were to contact you and say, "Hi, I'm Erin from OISC. Can our crew come and survey the stream in your backyard?" That's the easiest thing to participate in invasive species management is allowing us to do our job and helping us to do that too. Yeah. And if anybody has questions, that's kind of our job too. We're here to answer questions and provide information. So please OISC at hawaii.edu if anybody has questions or wants more information.
awesome. I'll ask at hawaii.edu.
Yeah.
And what other projects you got going on besides little fire ants?
So we are supporting and trying to help Department of Agriculture with some coqui frog infestations. There's one in Waimanalo and Palolo and at the summit of Kuli'o'o. And then we also our field crew does a lot of invasive plant work. So one of our funders is the Board of Water Supply. We have some really high value native forested watersheds. So those are basically the sponge that provides our water. And so we do work on Myconia to keep it out of um, those watersheds so that we can protect and preserve the value of those. So there's a lot of environmental services that our forests provide to us that a lot of people don't realize.
Do you ever look at the possibility to utilize this stuff like should the whole island start be eating frog legs, or should we start making like pesto from Euconia? Euconia, no, that's a different thing. Myconia, like for example, one of the things that kind of broke my brain was in Chinese medicine, there's a plant called moxa, it's a why am I blanking on the name of this plant? Mugwort. Mugwort came from China. It ran in wild invasive in the continental United States, where I was from, in Lenape-Hokung area outside New York City, Orange County, in what's currently known as New York. And a there's just fields and fields and fields of this stuff that has just taken over, and it's the only thing that grows in that field besides probably ants and birds. But it's a tremendously valuable medical intervention. The process of harvesting and burning mox on people's bodies is a medical tradition that's been around for hundreds, if not 1,000 or more years. And that kind of changed my brain. I was like, oh my God, there's so much medicine growing in this field that we could not only harvest this and use to help us with our arthritis and our chronic fatigue and anxiety and all these things, but we could also help to balance this microcosm, this micro culture, I guess you will, and if you will, and so I'm wondering, like, do you guys ever talk about the potential uses of these things, like, or other potential ways to harvest, I guess would be the word?
Yeah, so there are some resources out there, some guides and some websites that talk about how to utilize invasive species. Most of the invasive species that we have here are low value. So they're really not going to have a lot of medicinal properties, and certainly not having a very different or more advanced medicinal properties than our native Hawaiian plants that are used for native Hawaiian practitioners
Mhm.
of holistic medicine. But one of the big proponents is to eat the invasives. So eating invasive tilapia, eating crayfish, eating strawberry guava, those are all good ways, but there's so much of it that it's really hard to actually like put anything back in balance or make a dent in it. But it's absolutely something you could do. And then there's been some projects using Albizia, trying to use Albizia wood. It's a huge tree. There's limited things that you can do with it just because of the type of wood it is. But building homes, building surfboards, using it maybe for biofuels, there's interest in that. So there absolutely are things that you can do to
Cool.
participate. Yeah.
So
And then I,
have
mhm.
you eaten any little fire ants? Are they spicy?
No, I haven't. I have not. I've heard stories about ants tasting like lemons because of the formic acid in their bodies. But
Gross.
we're talking, yeah, millions and millions of ants. I'll just buy a lemon and get rid of
Yeah,
the ants. Yeah.
yeah.
I'd rather have a lemon tree without ants than try
Then
to
an
harvest
an
some
ant tree
lemons.
that tastes like
Yeah.
lemons, maybe.
Right. Yeah.
So, give us your closing thoughts, and I'll let you go. I know we got about 1 minute left.
Yeah, I appreciate the time to talk about this, and it's nice to be able to get it out into different venues. You know, oftentimes we find ourselves preaching to the choir, people that are already interested, most of the time in conservation. But like I said, it's something that impacts everyday life. So you don't have to be a conservationist to like to work in your garden and not want to get stung. So it really it does impact everyone. So I appreciate that opportunity to talk to
Yeah.
people.
Oh, well, it's my pleasure to share the dozen of people who will be listening to this ears with you. And
Great.
if there's anything else that any, if you ever want to do this again and talk about some other stuff, I'd be happy to, because this is, it's interesting, and you've got other projects you got to promote, and there's no shortage of we've all got to do something to help to help keep the boat level. We all do have a responsibility to, and that doesn't necessarily have to mean like, it could be in your backyard, and knowing the plants in your backyard, and knowing who's from here and who's not, and maybe, if you can, maybe even just catching some fire ants in your yard and seeing them, is that could be a really big thing. That could be a
Yeah.
really helpful thing. So knowledge is power, and I'm happy to help transmit good, sound knowledge, especially in a time where misinformation has now been strapped to the rocket of AI. So, but thank you again,
Thank you.
Erin Bishop, for your time. So
All
nice
right.
to meet you in vivo. No, not
Yeah.
in vivo, in video.
Yeah. Nice to meet you too. And yeah, let's talk soon about different projects.
Cool. Sounds great.
Okay.
Have a great
Thanks,
day.
David.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye bye.